Welcome to the Gotland Game Talk for Project Managers and to the Game Design Department at Uppsala University. My name is Lina Source Emilsson. I'm your host today. I'm also a researcher and teacher in game design for Project Manager at Campus Gotland. This seminar series is actually part of the curriculum for students studying the bachelor program in game design and project management at Uppsala University. Saying this, I like to emphasize that this is an open seminar series and we are welcoming anyone interested and that wants to join us. The format of this seminar is that I will have a 30-minute conversation with a guest about a pre-announced subject. This part of the seminar will be recorded and you can ask your questions in the chat and I will bring them to our guest. After 30 minutes, we are stopping the recording and we are going into a shared Q&A session where you can continue to ask your questions in the chat or raise your digital hand and unmute yourself to ask the question. Today, our guest is Garrett Avery, an American innovation consultant. Garrett is active in the Berlin startup community where he helps innovation team around the globe to stay aware of what is essential in their external and internal environment to bring their best resources, their people and their ideas to life consistently. Garrett is joining us today to talk about how to get things done, co-create ideas and make them come to life. Welcome, Garrett. Let's see if you unmute yourself.
I appreciate it, Lina. It's
There
nice
you go.
to be here.
Always a pleasure to see you. Let's start up by allowing our guests to get to know you a little bit and your professional background.
Okay. Well, I'm not a very traditional person, so we can start that off. And telling people this very long list of things that kind of make you seem like this super person is always nice, but I think that it's short-sighted. So I'll share a little bit on both sides as to why I think that I can bring something to the table and possibly share some perspective. So I've actually got my bachelor's in psychology and got my MBA about 10 years after that. I have 3 kids. I'm 41 now, and I've been in Germany now, living in Bonn for the last 7 years. So I also have a little bit of expat experience. Started 3 different startups, failed 3 different startups, and that's all part of the magic of the game. Went through drug addiction for a fair amount of a decade, went through business in terms of doing management consulting. And so I've worked on multi-million-dollar consulting deals for Fortune 100 companies. And I've really kind of done the full gambit at this point before I went into innovation consulting. And so it's been quite a ride.
Yeah. Let's bring in and go into project management because let's set the scene here a little bit. What is a project manager for you and what is a leader?
Well, I think that regardless of what the title says, it's going to be a manager of people. And so I think that that's where we always get a little bit upset or a little bit misaligned. It's because we always have these titles and we get out of school and we go after a job and we're just like, okay, what's the title and what's the requirement sheet look like? And they have this requirement sheet that's a mile long that says you need to be this, 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 and this. You need to have this amount of skills. You need to have this amount of experience. And really 85% of the jobs are still going to come down to being a manager of people. So when you start talking about project management, you're talking about how well that you can get people to communicate in the way that's going to get them to the goal. And this leads right into what I would tell you about leadership is that since I've become a little bit older, I'm not some old man, but I've started to move away from results-oriented thinking. And don't get me wrong, every project manager needs to know whether they're on time, whether they're on scope, what the problems that their team has, put out fires, blah, 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 blah. And they need to keep in mind for what's going to be the overall goal and where they are, in the process to reaching that goal. However, that's all a framework. And once you have that framework understood, you don't need to beat that framework to death to say, we are at point XYZ. That means XYZ. That insists that we do this, this, and this. a lot of the times, if we take care of the moment and we do the best thing that's in front of us right now for the people on our team, then those things tend to take care of themselves.
We're going to talk more about this, but before that, also let's set the scene for what a project is. So what, in your perspective, is a project when you are working professionally?
It can be almost anything. And that's what I would warn people about whenever they get into the industry, is that every single company that you go to is going to have a different definition of what a project looks like, what kind of scope it has, and what the general outline is going to be of how you need to handle your team roles and responsibilities. So let's be simple. Get something done. A project is getting something done. Don't be any more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And how do we know if the project has value, and if in the end, like during the process, and in the end, that we have been successful managing the project?
Unfortunately, they have a lot of politics that's going to go in whatever position you take up. And that's just part of the game. I specifically like working with startups because they have less of this feel. The bigger the company that you go for, the more politics you're going to have, the slower you're going to have to move. And there's always going to be not a polarity, a dichotomy for what the goal is and what got done, because there's always what the company says the goal is, like what your next level of management says the goal was. And then there's usually something underneath that, which is like, this was the most impactful thing that needed to be done. And I think that it's the question, once again, of just how well you know your people and the situation that you're in, that you can kind of manage both of those. Because the best project managers that I ever ran into, or the best times that I was ever able to do it myself, it meant that I was checking off a certain amount of boxes for the company, but in the background, I was actually having another focus that everybody knew would be the most impactful, but it couldn't always necessarily be the flag waving in the front.
So we kind of settled that a project is getting things done. So how do we do that?
People, and more people. And the reason I got my MBA almost 10 years ago, and there was all of this research, and I was just shocked and amazed because they were finding out that people were the most valuable resource. And I kept reading this, and I'm just like, guys, like, we've always known this. Like, where did this come from as a late breaking study? But the question of how you get things done is always going to come back to the question of how well you can manage people. And I like the fact that you said this word leadership, because eventually you're going to find out that being a manager can often be a terrible experience. It's often a thankless role. You're often going to have unrealistic expectations on both sides. And so not only for the role, but also for your own sanity, you're going to have to go deeper than just the standard idea of what a manager is. And what that looks like is starting to manage and build relationships well, because that's what a leader does. And those are going to start with circles with yourself in the middle. And if each progressive circle, it might be yourself in the middle, maybe your family or your team in the next one, maybe the company in the next one, maybe the end customer or suppliers in the next one. And we're always working from the inside out. And so if there's one thing that anybody would take away from this talk, it always starts with you.
So that is a huge thing to do. So what recommendations do you have for students moving into project management? How should they be able to manage all of these circles? What are your recommendations there?
Well, my first recommendation is, I would say that the most important thing that nobody told me was prioritization. They didn't tell me how important it was, and they didn't really teach me how to do it well. And I think that the few times that people did mention it, it was really always external things. It was like, how much money are you going to make? What's your career trajectory going to look like? What does this company look like? What are your benefits? And people are talking about retirement. and they're 21 and 22. And this is 25, 30 years off. And you're talking about what your retirement plan is going to look like. So what I would say in prioritization is that if I could go back and talk to myself as a younger person, I'd be like, how much do you know about yourself? How well are you figuring out the things that are making an impact in your life and the things that are kind of guiding you on a day-to-day balance? Like, what's your frameworks? What's your belief systems? What are your limiting beliefs? Because as long as you don't know any of these things, you're kind of going to tra-la-la through life, like following these ideas that were given to us a lot of times by our culture or by our parents or by our school or wherever. And it's kind of like following the smoke and we never get to the fire. And most of the professionals that I talk to now in their 40s and 50s will tell you basically the same thing. Either A, they're still following that smoke. And this is a classic American concept that I really have tried to get out of my system, is that one day I will buy my happiness. You know, like I'll buy the right color car, I'll find the job that makes enough money, you know, it'll just be a combination of that and the right family and the white picket fence, and that everything will be okay and that I'll feel okay inside. And I know it's not true, but my culture and the marketing just beat it into me. And so on the other side, I've become more conscious through a lot of, practice. And I know I'm just like, okay, this isn't about what's going out there. So that's what I would say with that prioritization. A lot of the times, and specifically in Germany, it's very popular. When they're 18, 19, they're already so like career. I would argue that it might be as much as the first 10 years of your career that have almost zero impact on what your overall happiness and contentment with your overall trajectory are going to be later in your life. They're just building up experiences.
So why is this important to be a good project manager?
It's really more for anything, but specifically for project management, because you're managing people and you want to be a leader, then you need to know what somebody's language is. And understanding what somebody's language is understanding how they're doing with everything that I just talked about. And so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's like, if I'm talking to Jim or Karen or whoever, Mohammed, about what they're doing in their job, and I'm trying to get to the heart of the matter, then I have to know where they're coming from. And that's always going to come down to me being able to ask the right questions and to be aware enough about what they're doing in their life and why they're doing it. And if I don't know that for myself, if I don't know what that sort of, consciousness looks like, I can't figure that out for somebody else.
Let's talk about the internal and external environment to be able to really work with these resources of people and ideas. So what kind of internal and external environments are you talking about?
Well, once again, it's a number of different circles. And so we'll talk about some classic terminology that you'll have project manage stakeholders, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, suppliers, this, that, or the other. And it is important, like I said, to have a good framework and a good understanding of the technical, nuts and bolts of how project management works, how your industry works. So I'm not saying that isn't a basic requirement for you to do a good job. And, that's part of continuing education. Like, that never stops, because you can always be a little more aware about that. And having an actual interest in what you're doing is part of the whole awareness process. But internally, when you're managing yourself well, if you're compassionate and wise with yourself, then it's naturally going to radiate out. They have this thing where love people, and hurt people. That's just generally how the world works. And so get your schooling in, find people to mentor you who seem like they're content with their life in their 40s or 50s. And that's just a good start to building a foundation. After that, you put the experiences on it. And once you start working well with yourself, it's literally going to start mirror itself in these relationships that you have with both the internal and the external stakeholders at your company. But that starts on, like we said, the very first and fundamental level of knowing yourself, knowing how you get things done emotionally, mentally, professionally, relationship-wise, like all the way across the board.
So in the introduction, I said that you work with innovation team to empower them to like really take care of and be aware of these internal and external factors. So innovation is really a word that is like thrown around a lot. So what is an innovation team?
We came out of the consulting realm and we went into products after about 9 years. And it's a classic story where they were helping people to do it and they figured out that the tech really wasn't solid enough to get the job done. And so for us, it comes back to figuring out how to make somebody people ready and then make them tech ready, because the people ready has to come first. And then the tech ready is supposed to be icing on the cake. A lot of the times people get that backwards. They throw software at a problem and they're just like, go get this new, I heard these new buzzwords, go get software that does that. And if the people aren't ready here and here, then it just goes straight over their head, or it becomes this mess where nobody wants to use it. And this all comes back to design, and structure. So an innovation team is just helping people to do things better and to make that a repeatable and scalable process.
When you say us, can you tell us who are us when you're talking about us?
Absolutely. And are you talking about my company?
Yep. And
Okay.
you refer to that.
Yeah, this is Innovation Cast. We're a small team out of Portugal, 10-person startup right now. Like I said, I love working with startups and just really heart-heavy people. Like I met my boss and I was just like, this is one of the nicest people I've ever met. And that's what actually influenced me to start working for him, because if you go out there and you decide to trace money and career, and I don't blame anybody for it, I get it. I understand wanting to feel, stable and wanting to look good and have money and this, that, or the other. Eventually you'll come down to the point of, I want to have nice people to be around. And so that was what influenced me to work with this team. And so since I've started working with them, Leonardo Varela and Carlos Mendez are the two co-founders. And we've really just started focusing on how we can start approaching more impactful areas. And once again, working on that people angle and how we can empower people to actually do, kind of what our natural instinct is, which is to be more efficient and to be a little bit more innovative.
So this internal and external factor we talked about, how do they impact the innovation power of a team?
Not to get too flighty, because I know that sometimes whenever we're deep in learning, that abstract ideas can kind of turn us off. But I think that a lot of our best ideas come a little from the beyond, and a lot of the times you could read something about, like, for instance, Albert Einstein. He said that a lot of his best ideas came from this time, 15 to 20 minutes right after he woke up. And he would literally just be like kind of in between. And the reason why I mention that is that I think that there's a natural part of us that can get into these flow states. If you've heard of people say things like that. And that's where we do our best work, where all of a sudden we start to go beyond, our logic and our framework and the boxes that we're in. And we naturally start to do what's right for the situation, what's right for the moment, what's right for the people in front of us. And so to me, it's all about kind of checking off enough boxes to allow us to be able to get into that flow state.
So this is like, there are a lot of theories of group development out there. And yes, we have a few of them in class, I can tell you, but it's really hard to know. So could you just tell us how you work with these companies to initiate, support, and develop this culture to make them move in through all of these phases of group development to the flow? from like meeting the first time to getting into flow. So how do you work with them to support them in this?
Okay. The very first thing that I would tell you, and this isn't just an innovation, this is in project management, this is in consulting, all the different ranges of consulting, it will happen more or less the same way. So I hope that this is a takeaway for you guys. The very first thing I tell people is that it's not magic. And a lot of people, they really, really want magic right now. And I think it's maybe too many YouTube videos where it's just like, it used to be 5-minute abs, and now it's like, here are 3 steps to enlightenment, and here's 6 steps to $1 million, and here's watch this TikTok video and you'll never have problems again. And I think that people are just unaware now that like everything is a process. And so specifically, when you start talking about what you just said, you know, a strategic process to get a team into the place where they can be in flow state, like that takes time. And so once again, we'll use a great word for project managers: manage expectations with yourself, with your team, with your company, as well as you can. And when you tell people things up front, it is the best possible thing that you can do for relationships, because scope creep is a real thing and it happens all the time. And you won't even be aware of it a lot of the time. So now that I've said that as the foundation, you know, setting the stage is always about figuring out what happened before you got there. Any consultant will do this. Any project manager will do this. A good manager will do this. And this comes back to people. If you go and you're in a fresh assignment, or you're in a fresh company or a fresh situation, and you go and talk to people and literally not trying to network, not trying to connect, not trying to get something from somebody, but just be curious. Hey, my name is such and such. I just got here, this, that, or the other. I was curious what happened here or what happened with this. And most of the time, just being honestly curious about what happened with certain people in certain situations, they'll tell you more or less the truth, specifically because people love to gossip. Even if you're the new guy or the new girl, like they will tell you exactly what happens, and they will give you a laundry list of highly suspecting like things not to do again. This happened with this person. This is the politics behind this situation. This strategy tried, but it didn't work for these reasons. And so what we do to start off with is always go and talk to the people and try to have as many of these conversations as possible, you know, and try to lower those walls, lower those barriers, and just be like, hey, we're here to help. And when you do come from a sincere place, those conversations get to the point because they feel that from you. They're just like, wait a second, Garrett isn't, you know, a big three, nothing against big three consultancies. Garrett isn't
Big three, what is that?
Big three is the top 3 consultancies in the world, like Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, and I always forget the other one. But the point is that they're known for being a little bit cold. They make a lot of money and they do their thing very, very cut and dry. And when you talk to people compassionately, then all of a sudden you'll start to see them melt. And it might not be every person, but going in and having those conversations will start to give you a little bit of a feel for the water. And it'll also give you a little bit of understanding about what has been happening there. And so then the next step is always going to be design. And it's taking what you just understood about what the situation was like, what mistakes that you're going to be looking for not to repeat, and what you can find from what they've already done to improve upon, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And usually somebody has been trying to make the change that you want to implicate 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years, and it hasn't worked for XYZ. So now when you're starting to design, you're looking for champions and you're looking for people who already know part of the formula.
What are champions?
Champions are anybody who are ready to wave the flag or to run behind it. And when I say wave the flag, I mean, if you have something that you want to get done, then you need to be the person waving the flag and saying, come on, guys, follow me. And this is an important part of leadership, because most of us as human beings have security issues because we're scared. And this is natural. And all we usually need is for somebody to wave the flag and say, follow me. They need to be strategic, because a lot of us are very logical mindsets in these corporate settings. They need to be somewhat passionate, not like completely passionate, because there have been a lot of dispassionate leaders over the time. And they need to be compassionate. And a lot of the times when you find some mix of these, then when you wave the flag, people will follow you. And so when you start building your design and you go start looking for these people, you're looking for the people who already have the answer. I was working in a Fortune 100 company, and we're trying to implement this big change because something with their prototyping had gone wrong. And so they're just hemorrhaging money in this process. And it involved 6 different departments, from engineering to design to this, that, or the other. And I went around and I'm talking to people, and people are telling me that they've already made PowerPoint presentations, they've done research, all the answers were already there. And so when you talk to human beings who have been in a situation together, the answers are usually already there. They just haven't come to surface yet. And so with any project, the answers are usually already in your team, or they just take a little bit of nudging and they're going to come to light. So research, design, execution, where you bring those champions, you wave the flag, you started to build up the support. And if your design is done well, then it's going to be an incremental increase. I work with just enterprise size companies, so it's always about starting small, getting a nice solid win that you can use for social proof, and then scaling in a smart and relevant way so that people can see that. Once again, work through that fear for themselves, because the bigger the company you work for, the more inner criticism or inner skepticism that people have. And they're waiting to see if this is real or not. Just like in any relationship, they're like waiting to see, is Lena for real? Like when she's talking to me, and they're like, they have whatever they brought to the table, whatever walls they have, whatever barriers. And in enterprise size companies, this usually takes 4 to 6 months. When you introduce a new process that they don't believe it's going to stick, they don't believe it's going to work, they don't believe they're going to keep doing it. And about month 5 or 6, they're like, well, okay, maybe this is now our modus operandus, like our MO, and I'll start getting on board. But you have to be consistent with your execution until somebody proves that.
So you have this podcast called Enlightenment for Clowns, Mindfulness for Millennials.
I do.
Yeah, you do. And you talk there, you share thoughts, you share experience and mental challenges. And there is like a list of interesting things that you address, actually. But there is one thing that I would like you to comment on before we go into Q&As. And it is, you have a session about getting out of your own way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's quite important when it comes to managers and leaders. And I think you agree with me.
Without question.
Yeah, but could you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah. One of my favorite statements is that you came here with everything that you needed. And I believe that when you came to this class, you came here with everything you needed. If you come and talk to me, then you come with everything you need. If you come to a new job, you came with everything you needed. Oh, Garrett, but I need to learn this, this, and this. I understand that. But our natural set of resources is basically unlimited. And so when it comes down to getting out of your own way, we have all of this, for lack of a better word, garbage that's been piled on top by our family, by our culture, by religion, by our political setting, and by whatever we've come with along the way. And usually these are the set of boxes and concepts and rules that aren't real anywhere but in here and in the shared soup that we swim in. And so I can't tell you anything about your set of rules and who you are, and I can't say how good or bad they are. What I can say is that almost without question, everybody's set of rules is short-sighted. And so when I say get out of your way, this is what I'm always talking about, is life is a chess game versus yourself. And yourself is using these extremely short-sighted rules in short-sighted ways, and it's limiting you all the time. No matter what you're doing, it's limiting you, and it's saying, okay, Garrett, now you have to do things in this way. And usually when we come into a problem, regardless of whether it's with a relationship, whether it's with a project, whether it's with a company, we have 2 to 3 options inside of our head. Out of infinite options, we have 2 to 3. That's extremely short-sighted. So breaking that down, even to the point where that 2 to 3 options turns into 5 or 6, can exponentially impact, what your life and what your opportunities look like moving forward.
And as a project manager, I guess it will have an effect on how the project can deliver on a set goal.
It's going to have a profound impact on everybody you're around, because these are the most lovely people to be around, people who make your life bigger and who give you more opportunity. And if there's one common thread, and it's super hard to judge what's good and bad in life because they flip-flop definitions all the time. What was good becomes bad 3 months later. What was bad becomes the best thing that ever happened, so on and so forth. What I can say, and this is my only kind of judging thing, does it open up more possibilities or does it close them down? And if you're the sort of person that opens up more possibilities for somebody in their daily life, they're going to love you and they're going to follow you and they're going to help you do things.
So it is time for us to go into the Q&A session. But before we do that, I want to announce our next Gotland Game Talk for project managers. That will be on the 7th of October, when we will meet Gabriel Gardel, an organizational psychologist, a senior consultant, but also a project manager at Uppsala University. And together with Gabriel, I will talk about leadership and effective teams.